0 seconds. A NATO-Russia war has crossed the nuclear threshold. One side uses a small number of warheads during a conventional conflict. Retaliation is ordered almost immediately, not after deliberation, but within minutes, because both sides know that waiting allows the other to destroy their remaining forces first. That logic, once activated, is nearly impossible to stop. Britain and France move their forces as NATO comes under nuclear attack. Hours into the exchange, China enters. North Korea opens a separate front. India, Pakistan, and Israel place forces on extreme alert but don't launch. Without a direct trigger, they stay out. Not every warhead on Earth fires, but thousands can still be used in the hours that follow. And the burning cities will create a second catastrophe capable of outliving the war itself. 1 minute later. The public doesn't know yet. Missiles are already rising. From silos in the American West, from mobile launchers deep inside Russia, from submarines beneath the North Atlantic. Early warning satellites detect the launches within seconds. More launch orders follow. The window for reversal, which was always short, has closed. In New York, London, Warsaw, and Moscow, it's an ordinary morning. People are commuting, buying coffee, dropping children at school. The only people who know what's in the air are watching screens inside hardened command centers. And those people are no longer asking whether this can be stopped. 10 minutes later. The warnings reach the cities. Emergency alerts go out simultaneously. National broadcasts cut into every channel. Get inside and stay at the lowest floor. And stay away from windows. Underground stations fill faster than anyone planned for. People pressed motionless against tile walls in London, descending into Moscow's metro with no destination in mind except down. In Washington, drivers abandon cars on the 14th Street Bridge and run. Some people spend the remaining minutes calling whoever they love. Some freeze entirely. Some keep driving as though distance might matter. The warheads are already descending. There was never going to be enough time. 30 minutes later, Washington and Moscow are hit. The thermal flash from a strategic warhead arrives before any sound, a pulse of radiation at the speed of light that lasts a fraction of a second and sets fire to everything it touches across several kilometers. Exposed skin burns before anyone registers seeing anything. Dark fabric absorbs more heat than light fabric. The pattern of what someone was wearing can be burned into the skin beneath it. Then the blast wave. Not the sound of an explosion, the wall of overpressure from a weapon releasing the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of tons of explosive energy. Buildings close to the detonation don't collapse, they disintegrate. Several kilometers out, structures that remain standing have lost every window, every exterior panel. People who saw the flash and moved toward windows to look are hit by glass moving faster than shrapnel. The National Mall, the Capital District, not damaged. Gone or burning or buried under structural collapse. The same sequence is happening over Moscow simultaneously. People who made it into the metro in the last 10 minutes feel the tunnels shake violently. Above them, the city they left is unrecognizable. 45 minutes later. New York, London, and Paris enter the exchange. Multiple warheads reach the New York metropolitan area. Midtown Manhattan takes direct hits. The thermal and blast sequence that struck Washington happens here across an urban density Washington doesn't have. Street canyons briefly channel the overpressure. Surface materials ignite simultaneously across dozens of blocks. Bridges over the East and Hudson rivers are structurally compromised or destroyed. The subway system where hundreds of thousands sheltered is intact in some places and catastrophically collapsed in others, depending on proximity. Across the Atlantic, London and Paris are struck. Central London, Parliament, the City, the Thames bridges, is destroyed or burning. On concrete surfaces at the blast margins, thermal shadows appear, sharp-edged areas where a parked car, a railing, or a person briefly blocked the heat pulse, leaving the protected surface distinct from everything scorched around it. The same phenomenon was documented at Hiroshima. They mark where something was standing. Thousands who survived underground in London refused to surface because nobody knows if another warhead is coming. That's the correct assessment. 1 hour later. Entire regions of the United States and Russia are under attack. Los Angeles is struck. Multiple warheads reach the metropolitan area, and the fires begin merging across a city built largely of wood frame housing and dry vegetation. Where fuel load is high and ignition simultaneous, fires start generating their own violent inward winds, the same effect documented at Hiroshima. Chicago takes catastrophic hits. Strategic targets deep in the American interior, missile fields, command nodes, military installations are struck alongside urban areas. In Russia, St. Petersburg is devastated. European-Russian industrial and military infrastructure absorbs successive waves. Fire crews arriving at destroyed districts find hydrants with no pressure, and roads that end inside collapse zones. Some turn around and use their remaining equipment to protect the edges of areas still intact. It's the right decision. It's also the only one available. 2 hours later, Central Europe is torn apart. Warsaw takes further devastation. Berlin enters the nuclear war. Major German urban and industrial corridors lose power, rail connections, and communications. Britain and France are no longer only receiving strikes. Their own forces are participating in retaliation. Large parts of Eastern and Central Europe now sit between direct blast zones and downwind radioactive plumes. A new problem appears among survivors moving through the wreckage. They don't know which direction is safer. One road leads away from a burning city but crosses a fallout corridor from a surface burst. Another stays inside blast-damaged terrain but has concrete shelter. People with working radiation meters become more valuable than people with maps. Small groups start following strangers carrying dosimeters, the only people who can tell whether an apparently intact road is safe to drive. Surviving Russian broadcasts claim NATO struck first. Western broadcasts describe retaliation against Russian aggression. Inside devastated cities, listeners care less and less about who is winning. They want to know which way the contaminated cloud is moving. 4 hours later, China enters the war. China has watched the world's 2 largest nuclear arsenals firing for 4 hours. U.S. command networks are fragmenting. In this scenario, Chinese leadership concludes that waiting may leave its deterrent vulnerable. It launches and the United States responds. Beijing enters the exchange. Underground garages and civil defense spaces fill so fast that access roads are sealed by abandoned vehicles. People crawl out of cars and continue underground on foot. In high-rise districts, elevators stop after the grid fails, leaving injured people dozens of floors above any medical help, and buildings simultaneously losing their exterior panels to the blast. Entire residential districts that were functional cities 12 hours ago are now burning ruins or collapse zones, generating their own ash clouds. Shanghai is struck as escalation reaches Chinese cities. Parts of the San Francisco Bay Area suffer nuclear destruction in this Pacific wave. The Pacific Ocean, which separated the original NATO-Russia exchange from Asia, is no longer a boundary. It's a new theater. 6 hours later, North Korea launches. North Korea sees American forces consumed by global war and the regional security system in collapse. In this scenario, Pyongyang uses nuclear weapons against South Korea and US-linked forces. The Seoul metropolitan area receives warning after everyone already knows those warnings are real. There's no disbelief phase. People run immediately. Seoul and Incheon suffer catastrophic blast, fires, and infrastructure destruction. Subway staff stop controlling access entirely. People pour through barriers. After the blast, survivors spray paint directions to underground spaces on walls because navigation apps are gone, and street signs in affected areas no longer correspond to streets. After that, retaliation follows. Pyongyang is absolutely devastated. North Korea's arsenal is far smaller than Russia's or America's, roughly 60 warheads by recent estimates, but that's enough for catastrophic regional destruction. 12 hours later, the world has multiple simultaneous nuclear fronts. Launches are less synchronized now but haven't stopped. Submarines that survived the opening waves remain capable of firing. Some cities struck once are hit again. Parts of Japan are pulled into the Pacific conflict. Tokyo avoids being completely destroyed, but regional detonations, disrupted power, and enormous refugee flows turn it into one of Asia's largest emergency centers. India, Pakistan, and Israel remain at extreme readiness. None of them launch. Without a direct trigger, they stay outside the exchange. And that decision, made separately by 3 nuclear powers, saves hundreds of millions of lives today. Radioactive clouds from surface bursts are now moving hundreds of kilometers beyond the explosions. Fallout is spreading faster than rescue can move. 1 day later, the main exchange begins to die down. Large coordinated salvos are becoming rare. The enormous opening exchange is largely spent. What remains are isolated launches, delayed strikes from forces that received orders hours ago, and the full reality of what has already been done. Entire central urban zones are gone. Some suburbs look surprisingly normal, and some of those are more dangerous than visibly ruined areas, because fallout is invisible and didn't follow city limits. A clean road can cross an intensely contaminated zone. A person can receive a serious radiation dose standing in a field that looks perfectly undisturbed. Organized looting has started. Not electronics, but groups with trucks stripping pharmacies, food warehouses, and fuel depots. Some buildings barricade their entrances to protect stored water. Other survivors abandon everything they own because it's contaminated, and they can't carry it without carrying the contamination. 2 days later, radiation sickness appears. Hospitals and improvised clinics begin receiving people who survived without obvious injuries. Some walked out of affected areas and seem fine. Now they have severe nausea, vomiting, weakness, fever, early signs of acute radiation syndrome. Some have burns that match exactly the seams and dark patches of their clothing. The fabric absorbed the thermal radiation and transferred it to the skin beneath. What makes this particularly frightening is that some of these patients will temporarily improve. Days of apparent recovery, then the bone marrow damage becomes visible, falling blood counts, infections that can't be fought, bleeding that doesn't stop. Medical staff who know what they're seeing know what it means. They're managing this alongside blast trauma cases and burn victims with almost no treatment protocols designed for combined injuries, in facilities running on generator power with dwindling supplies. Evacuees from contaminated areas are refused entry at some shelters, residents assuming anyone from a fallout zone is permanently radioactive, which isn't how it works. But fear doesn't follow physics. Piles of coats and shoes accumulate outside shelter entrances, stripped off before people go inside. 5 days later, the nuclear ruins become unlivable cities. Washington's central districts are gone. The mall, the Capitol, the White House corridor, reduced to collapsed concrete and ash still smoldering a week later. What remains of Manhattan is a burned grid. The skyline that defined the city, now a jagged silhouette of gutted frames above debris-filled streets. Los Angeles burns across dozens of separate fire zones that have merged into continuous destruction across the basin. Chicago's lakefront and downtown sit cold and dark under structural collapse. London's financial city and the Westminster district are ruins. Moscow and St. Petersburg are the largest destroyed urban areas in Europe, tens of millions of people's worth of infrastructure gone or contaminated. Beijing's central districts and Shanghai's waterfront are unrecognizable. Seoul is a city split between what the blasts destroyed directly and what the fires took afterward. A week out, the few people still moving through any of these places looking for something specific, medication, fuel, family members, and leaving as fast as they can. Major fires have declined, but vast burned districts remain. Water treatment has failed. Sewage backs up. Generator fuel for hospitals and emergency facilities is disappearing. Medical teams make triage decisions they weren't trained for. A patient with massive burns and a lethal radiation dose receives pain control instead of resources that might save several others. Families hide radiation symptoms from shelter managers to avoid being forced out. Looters are taking medical oxygen, antibiotics, and generators, or not consumer goods. The radiation injuries that temporarily seemed to improve are now worsening. Bone marrow damage shows up as falling blood counts. Minor infections become life-threatening. Burns that would have been survivable with normal medical care become fatal as immune systems collapse. 1 week later, the invisible map replaces the old map. Fallout follows wind and precipitation, not city limits. Some heavily bombed places become accessible sooner than expected as short-lived isotopes decay. Other untouched regions become exclusion zones because the wind carried contamination across them. Where rain intersects contaminated debris, dark precipitation deposits radioactive material on roads, roofs, and fields that look perfectly normal. In some rural areas downwind of major strikes, the grass is green, the roads are intact, and the dosimeter reading is enough to kill within hours of exposure. Radiation teams draw new maps. Safe for several hours, unsafe outdoors, do not enter. People tape handwritten dosimeter readings to crossroads because those are the only readings available. Convoys stop at invisible boundaries when the meter climbs. Families separated by 20 kilometers may be unable to reach each other because the shortest road crosses a contaminated plume. 2 weeks later, the sky begins changing. Soot from hundreds of burning urban and industrial areas has reached the upper atmosphere. The sky is hazier, daylight is slightly weaker. Temperatures are dropping abnormally across large parts of the northern hemisphere. Summer regions having nights that feel like November. Frost appearing where crops should still be growing. Large US-Russia nuclear war climate models have projected roughly 150 million tons of soot entering the atmosphere. That soot can remain at altitude for years, blocking sunlight across growing regions that were never bombed. Across the American Midwest, crops already damaged by disrupted fuel and fertilizer supplies encounter killing frosts. In southern Russia and Ukraine, surviving grain regions lose parts of their growing season. Farmers stop thinking about prices. They start thinking about whether to eat the seed or preserve it for a crop that might not survive next season either. 1 month later, food becomes the next battlefield. The mushroom clouds are gone. Many initial fallout zones are less intensely radioactive as short-lived isotopes decay, though severe hotspots remain. But destroyed cities are still largely non-functional, and now the food system is collapsing. Cold, reduced sunlight, and disrupted rainfall combine with missing fuel, fertilizer shortages, damaged machinery, destroyed transport, and collapsed international trade. In surviving parts of Europe, ration lines become permanent. In Japan, food and fuel imports collapse after the Pacific War destroys normal shipping. Authorities in parts of North America guard grain elevators the way they guard military installations. Food riots begin in some intact cities. Governments seize commercial grain stocks. Farmers hide reserves from requisition teams. Black markets stop trading electronics and start trading calories, medicine, and fuel. 3 months later, countries that were never bombed begin breaking. No nuclear weapon had to hit Buenos Aires, Sydney, or Cape Town for the war to reach them. Their skylines still stand. But international trade has collapsed. Shipping is unreliable. Fertilizers and machine parts are scarce. Agricultural exporters face impossible demand from countries that are starving and can't pay with currencies worth anything. Borders become more restricted. Food exporting governments prohibit shipments even to former allies. People begin migrating not toward wealthy capitals, but toward regions believed to have reliable crops, fisheries, and fresh water. Some countries remain coherent, others begin fragmenting. The climate shock is still intensifying. Land temperatures and growing conditions are deteriorating faster than most governments were prepared to acknowledge even as it was happening. 1 year later, the explosions lasted hours. The catastrophe is still accelerating. A year after the first strike, the cities destroyed on the opening day remain vast burned and contaminated ruins. The former combatants contain enormous regions where major cities, industry, and transport networks have been destroyed. Surviving governments operate with a fraction of their former capacity, but nuclear blast zones are no longer the main source of global mortality. Cold and famine are. A study published in Nature Food found that a 150 teragram soot scenario from a full US-Russia war could place more than 5 billion people at risk of death from famine. With the worst crop losses projected for years 2 through 4, not year 1. 1 year in, the world is not past the worst. It's moving toward it. India, Pakistan, and Israel never fired. Their cities were largely spared, but their populations faced the same climatic and agricultural collapse. Not joining the exchange saved hundreds of millions from immediate nuclear death. It didn't remove them from the nuclear winter. Children in surviving communities know Manhattan, Moscow, London, Beijing, and Seoul as places from photographs, images of a world that existed before the war. The nuclear exchange lasted less than a day at its most intense. Its deadliest phase could last for years.